Next prominent Black American, and that would be Robert Louis Stevenson. Robert Louis Stevenson was born on the 13th of November, 1850, and he died on December 3rd, 1894. He was a Scottish novelist, poet, travel writer, most noted for Treasury Island, the book Kidnapped, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and A Child's Garden of Verses. He was born and educated in Edinburgh. Stevenson suffered from serious bronchial trouble for much of his life, but continued to write prolifically and travel widely in defiance of his poor health. As a young man, he mixed in London literary circles, receiving encouragement from Andrew Lang, Edmund Gosse, Leslie Stephen, and W.E. Henley, the last of whom he may have provided the model for Long John Silver and Treasure Island. In 1890, he settled in Samoa, where he died in 1894. A celebrity in his lifetime, Stevenson's critical reputation has fluctuated since his death. Though today his works are held in general acclaim, he is currently ranked as the 26th most translated author in the world. As I mentioned before, Stevenson was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, to Thomas Stevenson, a leading lighthouse engineer, and his wife Margaret Isabel, born Balfour. He was christened Robert Louis Balfour Stevenson. At the age of 18, he changed the spelling of Louis, L-E-W-I-S, to Louis, L-O-U-I-S, and dropped the Balfour in 1873. All right, so I've given you some background on Robert Louis Stevenson. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the references I'd like to bring your attention to and why I believe that he is a black man. All right, so this reference comes from the Invisible Heroes manuscript, written by Roy H. Williams, and is a collection of more than 100 biographical stories. All right, so I'm going to go to the number 36 story, and that is the biography of Sam Longhorn Clemens, aka Mark Twain. And what it says here is Clemens is introducing his daughter to Robert Louis Stevenson, and it goes on to say, one of the high points in Sam's life came when he was introduced to Robert Louis Stevenson, the celebrity author of Treasure Island. In a letter home to young Susie, Papa Sam described him thusly. He was mostly scantily furnished with flesh. His clothes seemed to fall into hollows, as if there might be nothing inside but the frame for a sculptor's statue. His long face and lank hair and dark complexion and musing and melancholy expression seemed to fit these details just and harmoniously, and altogether, if it seemed especially planned to gather the rays of your observation and focalize them upon Stevenson's special distinction and commanding feature, his splendid eyes. They burned with a smoldering rich fire under the penthouse of his eyebrows, and they made him beautiful. All right, so as we can all see, Mr. Clemens, aka Mark Twain, described Stevenson as having a dark complexion. All right, so my next reference from a book called Robert Louis Stevenson in California by Catherine D. Osborne, written in 1911, and we're going to go to pages 36 and 37. All right, so you can see there on page 36 at the bottom it says, he was tall and thin naturally and emaciated by illness. His hair was light. All right, moving on to page 37, it continues, brown and down on his neck. His complexion olive but rich tinted, for he never lost his color even in sickness, and his lips were full red. His manners and gestures were like those of Latin people. All right, so she describes his complexion as being olive but rich tinted. I don't know if you guys have seen an olive, but I've seen them, and they're brown and black. And of course, if a person has a brown complexion, they're not going to lose their color even if they're sick. All right, so I want you to take a look at a picture that Google has for Mr. Stevenson. Does he remotely have a dark or olive complexion? I think not. And yes, I know you can hear the sarcasm in my voice as this video goes on, but it's really frustrating to read one thing and see another. The other thing that is very frustrating for me and that I've alluded to is that you have all this collection of historically important people that many of us have learned about in school, but no mention of their appearance as it pertains to their complexion. I mean, This is like a big deal to me. I don't see how it's just glanced over and not talked about, and I've told you why I believe that is the case. All right, my last reference for him is from the Project Gutenberg ebook of the life of Mrs. Robert Louis Stevenson by Nellie Vandergrift Sanchez, 1920. All right, so going on to page 13 of that ebook, it says, "My hair was braided in front and my everyday gingham sunbonnet sewn to my hair. This was done in the vain hope of keeping off sunburn, for I was dark, like my mother, and my complexion was the despair of her life. Beauty of the fair blonde type was in vogue then, so that I was quite out of fashion. It was thought that if one was dark, one had a wicked temper. In reality, Fanny, with a clear olive skin, her bright black eyes, her perfectly regular features, and mass of half-curling dark hair, was the prettiest in the family, but the dictates of fashion are imperious. So her mother put lotions on her face, and her grandmother washed it with strong soap, saying, 'She is that color by nature. God made her ugly.' The little girl asked rather pathetically if they would not change her name to Lily, to which her mother replied, 'You are a tiger lily.' In years after, in her many gardens in different parts of the world, there were always tiger lilies growing. She was a high-spirited, daring creature, a little flashing firefly of a child, eagerly seeking for adventure. That might have brought up her frequent punishment were it not that her parents had exceedingly liberal views in such matters." All right, so there are several takeaways from this quote by Mrs. Stevenson. The first one is that Robert Louis Stevenson was not only a black man, but he married a black woman, which makes total sense. Number two, Fanny describes her own complexion as dark, like her mother's.